The morning after the funeral, I stood in my driveway staring at the moving trucks lined up like vultures in the cold gray light. The air smelled like damp asphalt and fresh cardboard, and for a moment I couldn't tell if the trembling in my hands came from the chill or from the realization that my own daughter was stripping my life clean. If you've ever trusted someone only to feel the ground drop beneath you, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. You're not alone in that kind of shock. I kept watching strangers carry pieces of my world past me, each box reminding me how quickly a home can become a battleground. I didn't know it yet, but that was only the beginning of what I was about to uncover. I remember sitting there in that dim conference room, still wearing the black dress I had worn to Michael's funeral only 3 days earlier, feeling as if my body were moving through cold, heavy water. Grief makes time strange, and as the lawyer read through the will, I felt like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. But it was mine. What shattered me wasn't just the sorrow. It was the moment I heard that my daughter, Emily, had been left our family home and every bit of the wealth Michael and I spent decades building together. I saw the spark in her eyes even before the lawyer finished speaking. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't love. It was the unmistakable shine of someone who believed they had won something. And then came the part meant for me. A plane ticket. One first-class trip out of the country. As if I were being gently packaged and shipped away, I kept trying to make sense of it, telling myself I must be misunderstanding something. But the truth pressed against my chest. My own daughter looked relieved, almost eager for me to step aside. In that moment, it felt like I had been erased. 40 years of marriage, 30 years of motherhood, gone with a few sentences on paper. But even through the fog of humiliation and heartbreak, a small part of me stirred. Michael had never been careless. Not with money, not with family, not with anything. A single plane ticket didn't match the man I knew. Something about all of this felt wrong, deliberate, even. And as I sat there watching Emily mentally rearrange her new life without me, I realized this story didn't begin today. This fracture in my family had been forming for a long time. Looking back now, I can see how the ground had been shifting beneath my feet long before that day in the lawyer's office. Thomas and I built our life slowly, piece by piece, the way people do when they start with nothing but determination. We spent years saving, planning, and pushing through long work days just to create something steady for our family. I always thought the love we poured into our home and into raising Emily would be enough to hold everything together. When Emily was little, she used to cling to my hand and tell me she never wanted to grow up if it meant growing away from me. I held on to those memories for far longer than I should have. As she got older, the warmth between us cooled. It happened so gradually that I kept finding excuses for it. Stress from school, demanding jobs, the life of a young woman eager to define her independence. But somewhere along the way, appreciation blurred into expectation. Then expectation hardened into entitlement. Thomas noticed it too, though neither of us wanted to admit how stark the distance had become. I kept telling myself it was a phase, that she'd circle back once she understood the weight of adulthood. Still, there were moments, small ones, that left quiet bruises on my heart. Times when she treated what we built as something she deserved rather than something we sacrificed for. I ignored those signs because it was easier than acknowledging the truth. Now, standing at the edge of everything unraveling, I realized the will reading wasn't the beginning. It was the moment I could no longer pretend I hadn't seen what was coming. I woke up the next morning still feeling hollow from everything that had happened, hoping a quiet cup of coffee would help settle me. Instead, when I looked out the front window, I saw a moving truck parked in the driveway. For a moment, my mind tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they had the wrong address. But then I saw Emily standing beside it, directing strangers toward my front door as if she had been living there her entire life. I remember walking into the kitchen in my robe, still gripping my mug like it was the only steady thing left in my world. The house felt different already. Voices echoing through the hallways, boxes piling up, the rhythm of a place being claimed. Emily barely looked at me. There was no softness, no hesitation, just a kind of brisk efficiency, as though she were checking tasks off a list she had been preparing for a long time. With every room she stepped into, I could feel something inside me cracking. This was the home where I raised her, where I spent sleepless nights tending to her fevers, where Thomas and I poured our entire lives into making it a place of warmth. And now she moved through it like I was an afterthought, like my presence was a temporary inconvenience blocking her plans. The moment that truly broke me was when I understood the unspoken truth behind her behavior. She didn't expect me to come back. She didn't want me to. In her mind, that plane ticket wasn't a gesture. It was a one-way exit. The trip Thomas left me wasn't meant to give me rest. She saw it as an opportunity to clear me out, permanently. Standing in the living room, surrounded by everything shifting and being taken over, I felt the walls closing in. The house I built was no longer mine, and the journey I was being pushed toward suddenly felt less like travel and more like exile. By the time evening came, it was clear I had no choice but to leave for that trip. Not because I wanted to, but because staying meant confronting a truth I wasn't ready to face. Leaving the house that morning felt like stepping out of my own skin. I walked down the driveway with a small suitcase, trying not to look back at the windows where I once watched Emily ride her bike, where Thomas and I used to drink coffee on quiet weekends. Now those memories felt like they belonged to someone else. I kept telling myself I was only going because I had been pushed into it, because staying meant facing a kind of rejection I wasn't ready to confront. The first-class ticket felt strange in my hand, almost mocking. I had never flown like that in my life. The moment I settled into the wide leather seat, I felt a kind of numbness wash over me. The attendants kept offering drinks and warm towels, but all I could think about was how sharply the comfort contrasted with the coldness waiting for me back home. I stared out the window most of the flight, watching the clouds drift by like pieces of a life I no longer recognized. When we landed in Los Angeles, I expected to find my own way to a modest hotel. Instead, a man in a dark suit held a sign with my name on it. I stood there for a moment, wondering if there had been some mistake, but he gently took my luggage and guided me to a black sedan. The drive along the coast was beautiful in a way that made my heart ache. Soft waves, golden light, a life untouched by grief. Then the car pulled up to an upscale hotel in Santa Monica, far beyond anything I had ever experienced. Inside my suite, on the table by the window, waited an envelope with my name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a message from someone named Daniel Crest, someone who claimed to know Thomas and wanted to meet me for dinner that evening. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt something stir beneath the grief, a quiet, cautious curiosity about the truth I was about to uncover. I remember standing outside the restaurant that evening, feeling the ocean breeze brushing against my skin while my nerves twisted in my stomach. I didn't know what kind of man Daniel Crest was, or why he claimed to have known Thomas. All I knew was that I was exhausted, emotionally drained, confused, and desperate for some kind of truth to hold on to. Still, something inside me pushed me to walk through those doors. The dining room was softly lit, warm, and elegant in a way that made my breath catch. It felt worlds apart from the chaos of the last few days. When I saw Daniel seated near the window, he looked nothing like the image my anxious mind had created. His presence was calm, almost gentle, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that told me this meeting wasn't casual. As I sat down, my grief settled around me like a heavy coat. Part of me wanted to run, to avoid hearing anything that might shatter what little stability I had left. But another part, quieter, steadier, needed answers, needed something that made sense. Daniel began to tell me about his connection to Thomas, how they had become partners years ago while expanding a business venture I hadn't even known existed. I felt a sting of surprise at the idea that Thomas had kept so much from me, but Daniel's tone wasn't secretive. It was protective, almost reverent. He spoke about how deeply Thomas loved me, how careful he had been with everything he built. Then came the moment when the ground shifted beneath me. Daniel explained that the will Emily heard wasn't the real will at all. It was a deliberate test. Thomas's attempt to uncover the truth about our daughter's intentions. My breath caught as the pieces clicked into place. The ticket, the way Emily reacted, the sudden eagerness to push me out. It had all been counted on. Hearing it laid out like that was both devastating and illuminating. I felt a tremor of grief for the man I had just buried, mixed with a dawning realization that he had seen something I refused to see. As I listened, one truth settled heavily in my chest. Everything I thought I understood about my family was about to be rewritten. When Daniel placed the folder in front of me, I felt a strange heaviness settle over the table, as though the truth inside it carried its own gravity. I opened it slowly, expecting more business paperwork or some small extension of what I already knew. Instead, I found a portfolio far larger than anything I ever imagined Thomas controlled. Properties scattered across several states, investments I had never heard him mention, and accounts that showed a level of planning I could barely comprehend. It was as if I had stepped into a parallel version of my husband's life, one he had protected with absolute intention. The shock left me motionless. I kept thinking about the man who used to fall asleep on the couch after long days, the man who laughed quietly over morning coffee. I never imagined he had built something of this scale. And then Daniel slid one final document toward me. Ownership papers for a home in Malibu. A home Thomas had purchased outright. For me. My chest tightened as I took in the photographs tucked behind the deed. Sunlit windows, quiet rooms overlooking the ocean. Spaces filled with the kind of peace I had been craving without even realizing it. Before I could speak, Daniel handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Thomas's handwriting. Reading his words felt like reopening a wound and healing it at the same time. He explained that he had seen changes in Emily long before I had. He confessed that he feared what she might do if she ever gained access to everything he built. And he ended by telling me that the real inheritance was always meant to reflect love, not entitlement. By the time I folded the letter, the truth was undeniable. Emily had only received a fraction. The rest, his faith, his trust, and his legacy, now rested with me. And with that realization came a new, unsettling sense that the hardest truths were still ahead. When Daniel told me there were recordings, a cold heaviness settled in my stomach. I felt myself brace instinctively, as if my body already knew whatever I was about to see would change something fundamental inside me. I hesitated, hoping for a breath of strength, but there was no gentler way to face the truth. So I nodded, and he pressed play. The screen lit up with my own living room, my home, the place that still smelled like Thomas's aftershave, the place I had been pushed out of just days earlier. And then I saw Emily walk in with her husband. The sight alone tightened my chest, but what followed carved straight through me. I watched them celebrate my departure with a kind of careless joy, as if grief were something to be mocked. I heard their laughter through their movements, their gestures, the casual way they opened a bottle of wine and sprawled across furniture I had chosen with care. Then the tone shifted. They leaned close, speaking with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Even without hearing words, the meaning was unmistakable. Papers spread across the table, plans to take control, notes outlining how they would frame me as incompetent. Their faces filled with calculation, satisfaction, certainty. It was all there. My daughter and her husband preparing to erase me completely. Something inside me cracked wide open. At first it was shock, then heartbreak so sharp it felt physical. But beneath it all, a colder understanding began to settle, steady and immovable. There was no misunderstanding, no miscommunication, no wounded pride. Emily had chosen this path long before I saw it. By the time the recording ended, I felt the truth settle in my bones. Whatever came next would change everything, and I could no longer afford to look away. Activating the second will felt strangely quiet, almost anticlimactic, considering how much devastation had led to that moment. I watched the attorney open the sealed documents Thomas had left behind, and with every page he confirmed what I already knew in my heart: the house, the accounts, and the assets Emily had flaunted as her own were never hers. They reverted to me the moment the contingency clause was triggered. It was all so clinical, so procedural. Yet beneath it pulsed the weight of Thomas's intention. Emily unraveled the second the truth surfaced. I saw the panic rise in her eyes, the disbelief, the frantic attempts to make sense of losing everything she had already claimed. She kept moving around the room as if searching for an exit from a reality she had created herself. I could almost feel the sharp edges of her shock as she realized the consequences she had set in motion. For the first time in a long time, I felt steady, not triumphant, not vindictive, just certain. I stood there knowing I hadn't forced any of this. She had revealed herself, and the truth had answered. Her desperation shifted into pleading, not spoken words, but the kind of silent begging that shows in the slump of shoulders, in the way someone's eyes refuse to meet yours. I took it in quietly, letting the ache settle where love used to sit. I offered her one path forward, but only one: accountability, full honesty, real responsibility, nothing less. Whether she could meet that challenge was another matter entirely, and as I walked away, I knew the next chapter of our story would depend on what she chose next. 3 months later, I found a rhythm I didn't expect to feel again. The Malibu house no longer feels like a stranger's gift. It feels like a place where I can breathe. I've learned how to manage things on my own, from the small daily routines to the bigger decisions I use to lean on Thomas for. There's a quiet strength in discovering I'm capable in ways I never had to be before. Emily has been doing her work too. She's been in therapy, and every couple of weeks I receive a letter from her, thoughtful, honest, sometimes painfully raw. I can tell she's trying, and while the hurt doesn't vanish just because someone apologizes, it softens a little when they finally take responsibility for the harm they caused. Trust is slower. It has to be. But I'm open to the idea that our relationship might find a new shape one day, even if it never returns to what it was. Sometimes I think about the old house, the memories tucked into every corner, and I realize healing isn't about holding on or letting go. It's about choosing what comes next. And for the first time in a long time, I feel ready to choose. Looking back now, I can see how every painful step carried me toward a version of myself I never knew I could become. I'm still healing, and some days the past feels closer than I'd like, but there's a calm inside me that wasn't there before. I've learned that love is not the same as sacrifice, and boundaries are not the same as distance. They're simply a way of honoring who I am. If you're walking through something heavy, I hope you remember that you're allowed to protect your heart, even from the people you care about. Strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's just choosing to keep going. Thank you for being here and listening to my story. If any part of it touched you, I would truly like to hear your thoughts. Have you lived through anything similar? Share in the comments. I read everyone,